Christina, for making the time today. And I I guess for people that don't know, like what do you do, and how did you come to doing, well, a grief podcast and also grief support?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for creating this beautiful space. It was born out of a difficult situation, but it is nevertheless a beautiful space for many of us, and I'm honored to be here. So, thank you. I started, as many of us start on this journey, because what is it? We don't choose grief life chooses us. So in September of 2019, it was September 11. And so when I say September 11, a lot of people go to the one, the Twin Towers and the 120 something years ago. But it was my September 11, my family's September 11, that in the same uh, spirit, if you will, of the day. It was a catastrophe. It was a tragic loss for us. My brother died that day, exactly one day after he turned 32. We had celebrated his 32nd birthday the day prior. And then the next day, I spoke to him on FaceTime. 6 o'clock. He was on his way to my grandmother's house because my uncle was going to drop off his dog for the weekend. My brother was going to doggy sit the puppy, and they were going to meet at my grandmother's house. And I FaceTimed my brother around 6 o'clock, and I remember that because the sun was setting and I could see his beautiful face, and that what is it, the golden hour glow on his face. And I said, oh, he looks so angelic. And those were my exact thoughts. I remember, because that's not something I normally think, and that's not something I normally say, but I was like, oh, he looks angelic. And that was a fleeting thought in my mind. And 2 hours later, I get a call from my grandfather, who was out of town. He says, hey, have you heard from Joseph? Have you heard from, do you know where anybody is? Like, how come nobody's picking up their phone? And I said, oh, no, I just talked to him 2 hours ago. I'm sure he's fine. No, no problem. I was kind of wondering why he sounded so stressed. And now looking back, we connect the dots looking backwards. Maybe intuitively he knew, he felt something was wrong, because he wasn't even in the same country at the time. So an hour after that, I get a call, and my dad and I had, my dad is a very intense person. If you're listening, Dad, sorry. He tends to be a very intense person. And, I always said, how about this? We'll have a code word. If something is actually wrong, you're going to ask me, are you sitting down? Right? So that way I'll know that the call is not an emergency. So unless you say those words. So that same day, my husband and I are coming home from work. We're talking about our day, and my husband says, "Oh, there's this guy at my job that he always asks me, how's your day today? How's your day today?" And it's so bizarre because I just saw him yesterday, so why would today be any different? And I said to him, I bet you anything, if you sit down with this person and you ask about his story, there's something there that happened that makes him fully aware that no 2 days are alike. And so he doesn't take the day for granted. I'm willing to bet this, right? Literally, as we're having this conversation, the phone rings, and it's my dad. And I say, hello. He's like, are you sitting down? And in that moment, it didn't register, just because my mind, I'd forgotten about our code word. So I said, yeah, why? And he said, Joseph died. And he said it so, it just came out, right? And I got so upset with him, and I said, why the F are you saying that? And I don't talk to my father that way, but it was just like a visceral reaction. I said, why the F would you ever say that? And he said, Joseph died. You need to come home now. And I realized he wasn't kidding. It wasn't a joke. It was not funny. And honestly, I don't know what happened, but in that moment, something in me completely disconnected. And I started feeling like I was watching, in that moment, I started feeling like I was watching my life as an outsider looking in, like this wasn't real. I don't remember if I screamed or I cried or if I felt, I don't remember anything. I just remember everything going in like slow motion, but also like there's blanks in it. I don't know. It was very bizarre. And now I know that's called dissociation. So it's a protective mechanism that your mind does when it's too overwhelmed, right? And so that September 11 was the day that my story started. Fast forward a few months I thought that grief, I said, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. This is awful. Everything felt surreal. Everything was a blur. And I said, every difficult thing I've ever experienced lasted about 2 to 4 weeks max. So double the time, maybe this will be like 6 to 8 weeks, right? So when the 6 to 8 week mark rolled around and I was not feeling any better, I started to panic. I said, something's wrong with me. I'm broken. Like, I think something's wrong with me. And I started panicking because there was nothing that was making me feel better. So I call a girlfriend of mine, and she had lost her mother. Her mother passed away 10 months prior to breast cancer. And I said, when did you start feeling better? I need this to go away. Like, how does this make this go away, please? And she said, oh, honey, I'm in the baking aisle at the grocery store as we speak. And I picked up a baking sheet and I just started crying because my mom used to bake us, cookies and all this stuff. And it just reminded me of her. She said, this is grief. It's going to take a lot longer than you think. Just show yourself grace. And thanks to those words, that liberated me in that moment. And it made me fully aware that I was dealing with something that I had never known prior to this moment in my life. The grief wasn't just mine. It was seeing my parents going through the suffering, seeing my mom, seeing my grandparents, seeing my aunts and uncles, and how it immediately shattered our dynamics in ways that none of us really understood how. He was my only sibling. So in that process, I felt very alone and isolated. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing, how I could ask my parents for help when they were in no shape to help me. If anything, I felt like I needed to help them. And yet I needed help, right? And so I searched and I searched and I searched and I found some very generic things about grief or support groups for parents, but nothing for siblings. There was very limited information about siblings. And if there was, it was siblings and children who had lost a sibling or a parent as a child, but there was nothing for adult siblings. And I said, I can't be the only one, can I? Or feels like I'm the only one, but I can't be the only one. So in that process, I started to look for anything and everything that I could get my hands on to understand two things. What is happening and where did he go? Those are my two questions. I said, what is this thing I'm dealing with, our family's dealing with, and where did he go? And I don't mean it in the religious Bible sense. I mean it in the quite literally. He was physically in his body one moment and physically in his body and not in his physical body the next. And no amount of spirituality or religion or nothing was helping answer that burning question. So my quest began. I began absorbing anything from any source that I could possibly find. I stumbled upon a book that said the title was Into the Light or something about the light. And it was by an author named Betty Eady, I believe. And it was just a random book my grandfather had. I happened to open it into the chapter, I believe it was chapter 7, and it said The Tunnel. And I was like, what tunnel? So I started reading from that point forward, and I think I finished it the same day. And it was the first time that I heard about NDE. So it was her recount of her near-death experience, right? And I'd never heard of this before. I was like, what? I don't even know what I'm reading right now. This woman left and she died and then she came back and she's, did this. And it was all so strange to me. But it was the first time that I felt somebody had an answer to where did he go, right? And that sent me into this space of openness to exploring answers, places, stories, and people outside of what my known universe, if you will, my understanding at that time of what life and death are. And subsequently, that led into a journey of realizing there's a huge space for these conversations to take place, for these topics to be explored, and they're not being explored the way that I believe they should, right? So at the time I was working in real estate. This is a very long answer to your question, by the way.
It's okay.
The whole story here. Thank you. Feel free to interrupt whenever, but at that time, I was working in real estate in Miami, and Miami has been one of the fastest growing cities. Everybody wants to move here, it feels like, right? Not literally, but it feels like that. The growth has been unprecedented, especially after the pandemic. And it has never been a better time to be in real estate in Miami. People are benefiting from this left and right. And it was the time that I felt the most disconnected from the work. I was like, if I hear another person complain about doorknobs and floors, like I'm gonna lose my mind. Like I cannot. So I realized I was my heart and my life and my current state of being was not resonating with the work at all. I was like, I'm not any good to the clients. I'm not good to myself right now. Something has to change. I hired a career coach, and she was wonderful. She did it very holistically. So it wasn't just resume based. It was very much like, let's unpack what no longer serves you, and let's figure out what your calling is for this next step in your life. And through her, I discovered that I'm really, really passionate about communication and about sharing stories. And I am a very deeply, one of my values is curiosity. I'm deeply curious about people. I'm deeply curious about life experiences in a holistic way, and just want to know where people's stories and what they've been through. And at the time, I had this Instagram account that I created called Grief and Light. And Grief and Light was my anonymous way of putting my feelings out into the universe without to explore this grief thing that was all encompassing and that I didn't understand. And I kept hearing the phrase, grief is love with nowhere to go. I kept hearing that phrase. And I said, cool. So what if I give it somewhere to go? Because it's overwhelming me right now. It's a lot to carry. So I created this account and I started posting about my experience. And to my surprise, I started connecting with strangers with anonymous accounts. So it's a bunch of anonymous people talking to each other from all over the world. And I said, this is awesome. And that space felt more real than anything in my daily existence. And it was not tangible in the sense that I can't go there physically, but it was the most tangible in the sense of feeling supported. So through the work of with this coach and through the work with everything that I was learning and where I was and following my curiosity, I started piecing everything together, and I said, wait, this grief and light thing is the one thing that I wake up to every day that I really, really want to spend time there. Let me see where that takes me. And so, very long answer to explain that I want to connect with my soul tribe. I want to connect with the people who feel this deeply and who understand this deeply. I have one too. And I want to connect with these people, but they need to know I'm here. So this was like my Batwoman signal to the universe. And I said, I want to explore this topic. I want to be able to say his name with people who get it. And I want to connect with these other people. Very quickly, I realized this was so much bigger than me. It was not just about my brother or me having to say his name or all that. That stuff is great and it's happened. But very quickly, I realized there is a space begging to be filled in the airwaves, in people's hearts, in people's minds, in workspaces. I'm realizing in community. There's a dire need for community. There's a dire need for people to be witnessed. And I said, okay, this is way bigger than me, but I'm willing to move forward in whatever capacity I can. So that's where the podcast was born. I feel like you might completely understand where I'm coming from because I believe that's where the Grief Cocoon was born. And and here we are. And fast forward a year later, I get to sit with people like you and literally opposite sides of the world and connect on this bittersweet topic.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing all that. Did you want to share about your brother, like his name and what he was like?
I would love to. So his name is Joseph Rodriguez. That's my brother. He's 3 years younger than me. And I say is, I still talk about him in the present tense sometimes. But he's 3 years younger than me, and is the lightness in my life. He was funny. He was so funny, and he could lighten the darkest of days. He was very, very in tune with his emotions to a fault. I think that was part of the problem, or it worked against him many times. But he was very, very kind. He was very aware. He had this amazing spiritual awareness about life and people and what really matters in life. He was the person that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. And I feel like that's what I missed the most. And he didn't do it in a way that was preachy. He just he would look at me in a way that was like, it's going to be okay. Like, life is going to be fine. And his bear hugs were the absolute best. I love his bear hugs. They were the most reassuring, again, making me feel like everything was going to be okay.
Mm.
And I joke around that my husband and are together and married because my brother kind of co-signed on him. He said, "This guy is great. This is the one." I said, "Okay, if you approve, then we're good to go." Right? So I value his opinion so much because he had this ability to see through facades, to see through the walls that many of us put on. So if he believed something was good, I trusted that. And if he saw something solid in a person or something good in a person, then I trusted that, eyes closed. So he's wonderful. But like I said, he was also very sensitive. And I think that hurt him throughout his life. He struggled with substance use disorder since as an early teenager, which is nothing, I don't wish that on anybody. And he fought so hard throughout his life, throughout his entire life, which is part of the pain that I carry now because he struggled to fit into a world that was so different than him at the same time, and that was very challenging for him and oftentimes hurtful to him. And because of that and the lack of support that we had at the time, not necessarily because it wasn't given, but because we didn't really have as many resources and open conversations as we do nowadays about these things, there was more judgment, there was more stigma, there was less support in the time when he was experiencing this, especially so young. We're from Puerto Rico, my family and I. And at the time, my father got this amazing job opportunity to relocate to Portland, Oregon, in the US. And we did that, but it was at a time like what is it, Gen Z jokes around in the 1900s. So this was in the 1900s before Google. You can even imagine that. So when we moved, we were not aware of the cultural differences. We were superficial level aware of them. We didn't really understand exactly how that would play out. And it's a city where the minorities, if you put them all together, was less than like 8 or 10%. So it was a very homogenous culture, and we stood out like a sore thumb everywhere we went. That's not always a good thing, especially when you're in elementary and middle school. So that had an impact. I don't want to speak for him because I don't know the fullness of how he ended up there. But I do believe that, like Dr. Gabor Mate, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but Dr. Gabor Mate's work, it's not why the addiction, but why the pain. And I have no doubt that there was a lot of pain in him that we at the time were not aware of for one reason or another. And he self-soothed through like uh, what is it, like the not Adderall, but the, I don't know, some things that he self through in his school days, and that eventually became bigger than him, and it eventually took his life. The irony is that he fought very, very hard, tooth and nail. He said, "You may not see this, but I have to climb Mount Everest every day to get to baseline, to get to ground zero." So what people see from the outside looking in, when they see ground zero, they don't see what I had to do to get there. And I know in my bones that is so true. I know how hard he worked. I know he loved life. He wanted to live more than anything. He feared death, is the irony of all this. And he loved us dearly. And I know he fought for himself, and I know he fought for us. What I've learned about addiction is it's not a matter of willpower. There is an element of willpower, sure, but willpower alone is not going to save you. Love alone is not going to save you. A quote unquote good family is not going to save you. All the money in the world is not going to save you. Religion is not going to save you. So it's a combination of so many factors, a lot of luck also. And yes, the person has to want it, sure. But in some cases, it's bigger than the person, and it's bigger than the family, and it's bigger than all the efforts in some cases. And so a lot of what I do now is to bring awareness to this and to help families talk about this without shame. Shame paralyzes people. Shame
Mm,
quite literally can take somebody's life. And if we remove that factor, we have better chances of beating this together. Another thing is that it's a systemic thing within our society, but also within our families, and that's a very hard truth to accept. And I don't mean, a lot of people say, oh, it's a disease that gets passed on to families. I don't know the science behind it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying there are roles each of us play within a family system that impact the entirety of the outcome. And so a lot of people would think, oh, this one member of my family has a problem, but it really is a collective thing. It's your family has a problem, right? Or
mm,
let's not say problem if that's too harsh, and it's like a dynamic that needs to be fixed and worked on. Let's just say that, right? And that's really, really hard to accept sometimes. So he struggled with that, but he also lived very beautifully. He, like I said, was a beautiful, beautiful person inside and out, loved the outdoors, could not be indoors on a sunny day. And I'm putting it very lightly. I mean, how do you summarize the entirety of a person, right?
mm.
But I'm honored. It is, and was the biggest honor of my life to be his sister. I love him dearly, and he is my why for almost everything I do and have done. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about him and those
That's
important topics.
I know that you're involved in advocacy as well, and obviously you're finding so many ways to stay connected to him. Could you talk a little bit about how you are staying connected with your brother at this time?
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite topics. So immediately after he passed, we started having these incredible dreams. And I say we because it was multiple members of our family. And some of them were dreams, and some of them were what I now learned were visitations, right? I didn't know that at the time. So the difference between a dream and a visitation, the dream, to my understanding, right? The dream feels like a dream, like, you dream and just, it was weird and crazy, and you woke up and no big deal. And it's nice to quote unquote see him in the dream. That's always nice. Bittersweet, really, because when you wake up, the reality hits you again. But the visitations feel like an actual encounter with a person, and they're very real, and you could almost feel them tangibly, right? Certain things started happening right after he passed, beginning with one of my cousins who wasn't even, I don't even know if he had told him yet, but he messaged my mom at 5 o'clock in the morning. He said, I was going to wait until later today, but I can't. I just woke up from this dream where Joseph said, I'm so sorry I had to leave. I love you, and I hope, you like take care of yourself, something like that. And that was the first of a series of dreams that were very real, that had life altering consequences for so many of us. I'll give one example. So I had this dream where I was running behind him through a desert, like this beautiful, like Sedona, like desert with red mountains. And then we get to this plain area where this woman is teaching us yoga. And it's just a random stage in the middle of of a desert where we're learning yoga. And then I wake up. But as simple as that may seem, I remember waking up and hearing, the future is going to require you to be flexible. That was the message. And it was so loud, right? Not volume wise, but just the message was so intense, right? And I said, that was weird. Okay, whatever. I went about my day. About a week later, I get an offer for a new position. And at the time I was working in real estate in Miami, I get an opportunity to work in a private development. It's one of these positions that a lot of people seek out, and wasn't even looking for it. It just kind of fell off my lap. But it was so early in my grief that I questioned myself if I could do it. And this was January 2020. I go in for the interview. They tell me, great, you start tomorrow. And I was like, tomorrow? Like in my mind, I'm freaking out because I'm like, no, 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 it's too soon. I can't. I'm like borderline crying. I can't, right? As I'm talking to this gentleman, the director, he's saying, this is what you have to do. This is the quota. This is what blah, blah, blah. Like he's giving me all these instructions. I feel myself getting so overwhelmed that I have to break the connection in our, I have to look away. Basically, I was looking at him eye to eye, and I had to look away because I felt like I was going to start crying. I was so overwhelmed. When I look away, I see the door, and I had not noticed that the suite number was 119, but from where I was looking at it, it said 911. That's when the day that my brother passed away. So I look at it and I said, that's weird. And something about it was like, something told me you're where you're supposed to be. And then I looked at that. I looked at the guy again and I said, okay, I'll stay here for a second. I'll listen to what you have to say. And something in me calmed down. I started working for them. This was January 2020, end of January. February, we have like the onboarding period. March rolls around and I'm feeling like this is too much. I shouldn't have started this. I'm so sorry. I talked to the director and I say to myself, I explain to him, I usually don't quit like this, but I'm going through this life situation. I'm so sorry. He puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, it's just going to require you to be flexible. Like, and when that man said that, immediately it was like that dream came back to me. And I said, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what that dream was about. It's going to require me to be flexible. This is beginning of March. We had no idea the pandemic would hit and everything would shut down 2 weeks later. And it did. And because I accepted that position, this person, the director there, made sure that we were paid throughout the entirety of the pandemic at a time when people were losing their jobs left and right, unfortunately. And it was a very destabilizing time. This person said, don't worry, you're going to be taken care of no matter what. It's going to be fine. Thanks to that, we weren't going out or anything. So my husband and I were able to get out of debt because all the money that was coming in, we were paying off all of our debt and all of the responsibilities that we had to take care of. And I started noticing that maybe there's more to these dreams and maybe there's more to these communications. And at the same time, I was learning about the continuing bonds theory. So the continuing bonds theory, for anybody who doesn't know, it's the death ends a life, but not a relationship concept. And I started saying, what if I choose to believe that these things are real? What if I choose to believe that the signs are real, that there are messages in this weird, I guess some people would consider woo-woo way. I no longer say that, but back then I did. In this very ethereal, spiritual, universal kind of language. What if I choose to believe that this is how my relationship with him looks like now? This is it. It's weird, but it's there. There's something there. So I started asking for signs, and sure enough, I would get them in the most bizarre ways, beautiful ways. I started talking to him heart to heart. And I said, it's not like he responds back or anything, I wish, but I chose to trust that the message is being delivered. I chose to trust that there's still a connection. And I chose to trust that there's something much bigger going on. And I don't need to understand it all to be able to move forward in life. And so that became the initial stages of what our relationship looks like now. And I have stories upon stories. My parents and I made this pact. We said, whenever you have a dream, write it down. And so we have this log of 5 years worth of dreams and messages, and it's incredible. And whenever I'm feeling sad, because they kind of got quieter with time, it was very intense the first 2 years, and then it got very quiet. We look back on those and we say, no, it's still there. It's still there. And it's magical. And you could choose to believe it or you could choose not to believe it. That's completely your free will, but it's there. I for sure know it's there. So that's on the personal side. On the advocacy side, one of the most painful experiences was when I stopped sharing the reason why he passed away. He passed away because of fentanyl poisoning. And I trust you and the way you and your podcast, so I share it here, but I don't always share it publicly in other spaces, mainly because so many people immediately judge, and the immediate gut reaction for a lot of people was, well, of course, what did you expect? And trust me, he's better off there. And that was incredibly, incredibly insensitive and hurtful. And I stopped sharing the reason. So over time, I started connecting with people who either lost somebody for the same reason or who work in this space. And I said, gosh, fentanyl took everything from us. Why would I even want to humor it ever again? Why would I even want to talk about it? Why would I even want to give it any more energy? But I realized I'm not giving energy to fentanyl. I'm giving energy to the people that are fighting to survive. And I'm giving energy to the families that, like us, had to struggle to save their loved one. I'm giving energy to creating awareness and getting rid of shame and destigmatizing. And so it's not fentanyl. It's not that. That happens to be the elements that we're fighting against. And I don't even know if I want to say that, because what you resist persist. It's more that happens to be the common element in this situation for many of us. But what we're doing is, at the end of the day, humanizing certain life experiences so that people understand that we need to stop judging whatever these labels and situations and outside peripheral happenstances and circumstances that are surrounding, and focus on the core of the subject. We get so caught up in labels and should haves and could haves and what's good and what's bad. And I'm just like, throw all that, throw it away, throw all that side of the conversation away, and focus on the human. How can we become more human in the way that and approach others? How can we become more human in how we care for one another? And it doesn't have to get to a dire circumstance. We could actually prevent it from getting to a dire circumstance if we could just connect with each other one-on-one on a very human level. And whatever, we're all flawed human beings we're spirit having a human experience. Let my dog out there. Sorry about that. They're always fun. They always interrupt in like the worst times. my little pup Louie. But anyway, so if we could just, we're spirit having a human experience, I think is where I left off, is my belief. And if we could just approach each other that way, the manifestations of our pain and our sorrows and our struggles are less relevant than how we get each other back to center. And I heard in one of your podcasts, one of your guests say that recovery was recovering yourself, or recovering your sense of self. And I said, wow, that is a beautiful, beautiful analogy, because it's exactly that. You're recovering yourself. You're coming back home to yourself. And so that's how I get to honor him now, not just through the podcast, but working on ways that we can help other people by changing legislature here in the state of Florida, and hopefully in other places as well.
Wow. Yeah, there's so much there. And
So much.
yes, I do love that metaphor actually, that idea of recovering yourself. And I guess it seems like it's sort of extended, to you, that idea of like after loss, recovering yourself and what means something to you, and like doing something that's meaningful to give you purpose as well, and as a way to honor him. So that's really beautiful. It seems like you're finding community as well, and how important do you think it's been to find to find community and to connect with others in this space, whether it's about, how he died, or whether it's just connecting around grief? Like, what has that kind of brought to your life?
That's a beautiful question. Community is everything right now. Community is more the answer to all of these things than any other technical answer we're trying to find, either individually or collectively. I realize with time more and more, and the more I talk to people, the more conversations, the more groups I join, the more people I help, the more people help me. I realize at the end of the day, we need to be seen, witnessed, and heard as human beings in our fullness. And that includes our grief, and that includes our pain and our trauma. And what I learn is so many of us want to fix, it's in us to want to fix the problem, to fix the person. If somebody comes to you with a problem, well, what's the solution? And we focus so much on this fixing. And I learned that it's not about fixing, it's about witnessing. When a person is witnessed, when a person feels like they're seen and heard, they get to move forward in the best way and the most meaningful way for them. It is not our job to determine what another person's path forward is. And a lot of times we think we have the answers to a lot of people, and we think we know what the answers look like, including in addiction, including in family systems, including in our own grief, in others' grief, and we want to fix. And the first thing is to stop that. I don't know how else to put it. I was trying to make it pretty, but don't do that. Don't try to fix people. People are perfect, whole human beings, just as they are, even with their imperfections and their flaws. We are whole human beings. It is a returning and remembrance, and we have to feel safe to come back home to ourselves, especially after traumatic experiences. So as a supporter within the community is, I'm sure your listeners have heard this phrase, but holding space. We have to hold space for each other. And that space is a space for people to unfold and say their truth without being corrected. Say their truth as it is, say their truth as they feel it and as they're experiencing it without feeling corrected. And if you just sit there and hold space for them, even if you don't say a word, many times a hug is more powerful and healing than any dissertation research anybody could ever come up with. Sometimes it's just about, I see you, I hear you, and your feelings are valid. They don't have to be true to be valid, right? And that's the big one. We try to correct people and, no, don't feel that way. It's going to be okay if you just look at the bright side and da 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 da. And as well meaning as that is, it is detrimental, and it's doing the opposite of witnessing. It's inherently judging and fixing. So community has been key. It's very powerful to speak to other siblings. I have since found other siblings who have experienced this, and we don't correct each other. We say, yeah, this is crappy, this is horrible, it's awful, I hate it. and that's it. There's no silver lining to that. It just is what it is. So that's been one. I tried to focus. I've been taught to focus. Like, the riches are in the niches, you always hear, right? So I always try to niche down somewhere. And I said, that makes no sense in this context, right? Like I get it. Yes, there's power in like sharing within your own grief space. But the way that I was moving forward, and going back to the fact that curiosity is one of my top values, I said, why would I try to niche down when curiosity is just curious? Like, it likes to meander. It likes to go this way for no reason and then that way for no reason. And why would I limit myself to just this one space, right? So that was another lesson in living in the both and, that I said, well, it started opening my reality to the world of both and, that in grief, if you look at it like a Venn diagram, I always say grief is not this or that, it's this and that, and we live in the and. So I started allowing myself to follow my curiosity wherever it led. And it wasn't just in sibling loss. I thought my intention was to focus my work around sibling loss, but quite frankly, I just found stories in general more fascinating than the one topic. I'm not saying sibling loss is not fascinating. It's the most fascinating for me because I experience it and I know it so fully. But the more I noticed the need, grief became the overarching topic, the umbrella, and everything else was underneath it. So community is huge. I noticed that There's an unofficial grief community online, and and that's where most of us have connected. I don't think we would have met otherwise because, for example, in our case, we're literally across the world. And then in other people's cases, you're just not in each other's worlds for whatever reason. So the online grief community through social media has been crucial. And then I'm working to bring that offline now. I'm trying to create spaces in person as well, because I think that element is very powerful too.
And what about the relationship between like shame and community? You did mention shame and how judgmental people can be. So, what do you think community can offer that feeling of shame?
Beautiful question. Amazing. Communities can help normalize certain lived experiences. Communities help normalize the experience. And when we do that, we help remove the shame. Does that mean that everybody in the community is going to approve or be on the same level or have the same life experiences? Absolutely not. But within the community and the sacred spaces, you have to create boundaries. I feel like boundaries are essential in as a griever and just in life in general. Communities need to have rules of, for example, whenever I lead a group, there's no correcting each other. I don't care how much a person got triggered by somebody else's comments. That is their reality, not yours. So you do not correct the other person. That's a strong boundary we have. Another one is to create safe spaces, but the caveat with safe spaces is that the participant is the one who decides if it's a safe space or not. Me as a space holder, I can, as well intentioned as I may be, maybe my sense of safety is not their sense of safety, right? So understanding, like humbling enough yourself enough, understanding your own biases and looking at yourself first and understanding where your limits are, your beliefs are, your biases are, and learning how not to accidentally or intentionally yield them against another person. So to create community, you have to put your own stuff aside because you're a vessel for this to unfold in front of you. It's not you. I'm not fixing. So it's key. And so the normalization, the aspect of it is very good because in curated groups, whenever, especially for earlier grief or earlier, more intense, more acute energies, right? When you're going through earlier where everything feels like it's cutting you like shards of glass, right? So we're a lot more sensitive, we're a lot more raw, everything is still very recent. That group needs to be curated better so that the people in it are more protected than a group that has had maybe 5 years since the loss of their person and they've grown a little bit of a thicker skin, right? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just what happens with time. You learn to hold your own truth a little bit better than in the early days. In the early days, it's brutal. So with shame, it's the normalization aspect, the creating boundaries, the allowing people to speak their truth and be seen exactly as they are without correcting them. And in the early, curating those spaces is very important.
Hmm. And for people that, because I know it was very isolating for me as well when I lost my mom and I didn't really find that community. That's why I created one as well. But I am interested in like how people find others. And I guess what would you say to people that are wanting to find people that they can connect with while they're grieving and wanting to find community but are struggling to? What advice would you give?
Great question as well. So one easy one is just follow the hashtags. Go on social media, look at the hashtags. So, I've heard widows saying you look for the hashtag widows or sibling, bereaved sibling, or that's just a very practical tool where you could find who's talking about these, where are these conversations taking place, and that oftentimes leads you to a local chapter if you needed one in person, but it gets you a sense of who's talking about this. One big caveat is there's a bifurcation in the conversation about grief. And one is grief is pathologized, where if you're still grieving after 6 months, something's wrong with you and you probably need medication to fix it. I do not subscribe to that. I've been very vocal about not subscribing to that. That is not to say medication doesn't help people. Medication saves lives in the right context. Grief is not depression. Grief is not sadness. Grief is a normal human experience, and it's a normal response to immense loss. And sometimes that involves the death of a person, and sometimes that involves a big life change. There's nothing wrong with that. What you feel in the context of grief is normal. It's your divine wisdom processing this very intense life experience. So in that, the one bifurcation is grief is pathologized, and I don't agree with that one. And then the other one is grief is a natural, normal response to loss, which is the one that I subscribe to. And I mention this because in finding information, you will see people talking about it differently. Anybody who says, I can help heal you from your grief, well, there's an underlying understanding that grief is something to be fixed. So just be very aware. Somebody that talks about the 5 stages of grief, the 5 stages were never meant to be prescriptive to grief. It was about death and dying, not to grieving. But it's still, a lot of people still use it in the context of grief. So that, just be aware that there's different people that are talking about it very differently. And so I recommend personally going with the mind frame that grief is a natural, normal response to loss. Grievers will tell you at the 6-month mark, you're just getting started in your grief journey. So to say that something's wrong with you at that time is a bit laughable. And when you're looking for these spaces, so let's say you follow the hashtag, you find different people talking about it, you see the conversations evolving, just be aware of these 2 things, because you could be made to feel like something is wrong with you if you're following one set of conversations versus the other one. The second is follow podcasts like the Grief Cocoon and follow podcasts like mine. And we have amazing guests talking about these conversations. There are also local organizations for grievers that some are religious in nature, some are not. So there are local communities and there are local conversations starting to happen. But I found personally that the bigger discourse is happening online, and it's starting to go local in different areas, but the bigger support systems, I believe, are found online.
Mm. Thanks for that. Because I guess the US is like quite a big place. Where I am in Australia, it's like quite small in comparison. And so I'm actually curious about the differences sometimes in between cultures and between even countries, you know. I don't know what I'm asking actually.
No,
But
I hear you.
mm,
So I have found that in the Western world, we tend to be more, we value individuality, or we've been taught to value individuality more. And that has its good things and that has its detriments, right? And so one unfortunate side effect of this hyper individualistic culture is our sense of loss of community, our loss of ritual, and our loss of connection. We are more connected in terms of technology, but we are more isolated than ever. So unfortunately, I would argue that in Western-based societies, or with that mindset, that hyper-individualistic mindset, there is a strong need for these conversations to happen. And the support systems that, to my understanding, that have been in place for a longer time have been religion-based. A lot of people are stepping away from that for one reason or another. I'm not going here to judge one way or another. I'm just saying that there's a space for that, and there's a space for non-religious based, just human to human, peer-to-peer support type systems. In the US, I was looking for local chapters here. Based in Miami. I was looking for Miami-based ones, and I could not find any. I found one in a church like 60 miles away, and I wasn't going to drive that far. But I don't know how it is in Australia, but I do know that the in-person resources I've found have been more limited. That is starting to change thanks to these conversations and thanks to these more open-ended, more open conversations that are taking place. And I'm also seeing, which I think is fantastic, I'm also seeing a lot of these conversations going into the workplace. And that's huge because here in the US, we don't have bereavement leave. We have the places that do have it is like 3 days or something. It's something that's just not helpful at all in a way. So the conversations are starting to take place very, very, very slowly. But I believe that once we start making this more mainstream and the more conversations that take place, the more people that are talking about it, podcasts have been huge, huge, huge in this change, not just social media, but the podcasts. The more that people are going to start normalizing the conversations around grief and trauma and loss and normal human experiences that we have that should never be bypassed because it'll always be there until you're ready to face it. So I think that's happening. Now, I'm not familiar with all the Eastern-based, cultures or anything like that, but I do know that there are some cultures that have more a better sense of community and ritual. And that alone is amazingly helpful to somebody going through a difficult situation. So I'm starting to learn about different cultures, rituals, and different cultures, how they come together as a community. And I look forward to implementing some of that here, but I don't want to talk about it before I understand it as best as I possibly can, because otherwise I would just be, speaking kind of ignorantly about it.
Yeah, and yes, I think it's similar because over here we also, I am in a Western society, even though we have our First Peoples and they've had their own kind of traditions. Looking into the Indigenous communities and how they deal with things is really kind of enlightening compared to what's happening now. And I
Like they understood something that we lost, somewhere it got lost along the way, and they understood something so innately, and the interconnectedness of our lives even with nature, with each other. They understood that deeply. They understand because they're still around,
yes,
but
yeah,
they understand. Yeah.
yeah, and they're still using those cultural practices. So it's really amazing to see that. But just to finish off, is there anything that we haven't spoken about that you would like to speak about?
What comes to my heart right now is that if you're listening and it's in your heart to speak openly about these topics, and if you're going through whatever life experience you're going through, it doesn't have to be necessarily addiction or grief or anything like that, but whatever you're going through that is strong theme in your life, just understand that there's power in speaking about it openly, and there is power in vulnerability. And the more we have conversations about our lived experiences and our lived realities openly, there will be so many people beyond our wildest comprehension that will say, me too. And thank you for saying that, me too, right? When we unlock these me too's, and I'm not just talking about the me too movement, I'm saying in general, when somebody sees themselves reflected in your lived experience and they can relate to it, you unlock something for that other person. And this goes into an immense ripple effect in impossibly beautiful ways that you will never fully understand. We will never fully understand. That heals people, that helps people move forward. Love that quote from Ram Dass, that we're all just walking each other home. And I believe having these conversations is fundamental to helping each other get through life. Really, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you think you're worthy of speaking or not. Yes, you're all worthy of speaking. We're all worthy of being heard. I personally believe that's why we're here. That's part of why we're here. So if it's in your heart to start these conversations, if it's in your heart to do something with your lived experience, if you want to give it purpose and you're waiting for a sign, this is your sign. So thank you for listening.
I love that. Thank you. That was one thing in the back of my mind during this. I thought the power of sharing your story, and what that can do. So you read my mind in a way and said it in a much more beautiful way. So thank you.
We're in sync. Thank you.
So Nina, like if people wanted to, I guess, listen to your podcasts or find out more about your work, where could they go?
Sure. So it's griefandlight.com, grief and light. And the handle is the same on social media. I'm mostly active on Instagram. So Instagram is the best way to get a hold of me. And obviously the podcast, which I'm sure you'll link in the show notes. And yeah, that would be the best way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. There's a lot of wisdom in it, and I think there is a bit of a gap with people and so resources around sibling loss as well. I think that is a tricky one. I don't find as much around that when people are looking. So I think this is really important to highlight more stories and to highlight more resources around that. And of course, grief is a universal experience. So we can all kind of connect with each other regardless of like what kind of specific loss we've experienced, just like now.
No,
So
definitely. And I've heard somebody say there's more literature on pet loss than there is about sibling loss. So
oh
I don't know how
gosh.
factual that is, but
Yeah.
it definitely feels like that sometimes.
Yeah. Oh. Well,
Not to say pet loss is not important. It is
yeah.
very important as well.
Hmm. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you so much, Gabby. It was an honor, and thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. It is so, so important. Thank you.
Thank you.